Presented by Gioconomicon.net.
All right. No questions. All right. All right.
Una domanda gliela faccio io. Vorrei sapere come ha reagito la Wizard of the Coast quando è uscito il sistema di RuneQuest. Se è stato criticato, se è stato... qual è stata la reazione ufficiale fondamentalmente?
Right. Yeah, in those days it was TSR. Well, it's probably significant that RuneQuest won an award when it first came out, in the next year after it had came out, at Gen Con, which was owned and put on by TSR at the time. And the award was for Best Miniatures Game because TSR at that time didn't think there would be any other role-playing games. So they had no category for role-playing games when we won the Best Miniatures Award. This was fairly short-sighted of them. There were already other games out. Coming immediately to mind were Tunnels and Trolls and Chivalry and Sorcery, both of which came out before RuneQuest. Following relatively shortly thereafter came the Fantasy Trip from a company called Metagaming, which really had us worried, actually, because they had a very good system, which eventually became GURPS. But the guy running Metagaming didn't really understand how to sell role-playing games. So Fantasy Trip languished for a couple of years, and then Steve Jackson left Metagaming and started his own company, and GURPS resulted a couple years after that. But by that time, we had a firm foothold.
Probabilmente è significativo il fatto che proprio l'anno dopo la pubblicazione di RuneQuest il gioco abbia vinto un premio importante alla Gen Con, che era controllata dalla TSR all'epoca, e il premio era il premio per il miglior gioco di miniature, perché la TSR non aveva previsto il fatto che ci fossero degli altri giochi di ruolo dopo Dungeons and Dragons, insomma, e non avevano la categoria per altri giochi di ruolo, il che tutto sommato era abbastanza miope da parte loro, perché a parte RuneQuest già altri giochi avevano iniziato a entrare sul mercato, uno dei quali era Chivalry and Sorcery e un altro era poco dopo Fantasy Trip, che era pubblicato da Metagaming ed era un ottimo sistema che ci aveva anche fatto un attimo preoccupare tutti per via della possibile concorrenza. Il fatto che il sistema di Fantasy Trip era veramente bello, ma il marketing era veramente pessimo, non avevano idea di come fare veramente a vendere dei giochi, per cui uno di loro se ne andò e fondò la sua casa di produzione. Questo signore si chiamava Steve Jackson e il sistema di Fantasy Trip poi è diventato GURPS.
All right. Sure.
Ho io un'altra domanda. Perché RuneQuest? Cioè l'origine del nome. Why RuneQuest? What's the origin of the name?
All right. The origin of the name RuneQuest is fairly simple. I was originally asked to do RuneQuest by Greg Stafford, who had done a board game called White Bear Red Moon, and was later issued under the name Dragon Pass. The very original pieces for White Bear Red Moon, which Greg produced entirely by himself, had, instead of the usual company and armored and so forth markers for a modern day war game, had runes on them. And the runes told you what in theory at least, told you what the unit could do. And Greg supported his game with a magazine called The Worm's Footnotes. And in the first or second issue of that fan magazine, he put out an explanation for what all the runes are. And we were trying to work runes into the game, since I was doing it based on that world, which has many fractious storm gods. Oh, yes. I think Wizards of the Coast hired somebody or something. Yes. So, given we wanted to have the feel for the world, Glorantha, I figured we'd make the runes part of the game, and then while we were still trying to think of a name for the game, I figured, well, mostly people quest, and what you're trying to do is become a master of a rune. So, Rune Quest. And actually, the first edition of the Mongoose version of Rune Quest has a couple pages by me in it relating runes directly to the magic. I actually attempted to write their entire magic chapter, but I got entirely too complicated for them, and they decided it would all be one big magic book with a couple little role-playing notes. So they got Ken Hite, who is an excellent writer, to come back and essentially rewrite the original RuneQuest magic rules, and that's what's in the book. First edition. I have yet to see the second edition except in Italian, which of course I do not read. So I don't know whether that is still in the book or not. But the concept I came up with were that runes drop as the gentle rain from heaven. That's our Shakespeare reference for the day. As the blood of the gods, basically, and become items of one sort or another that people can find and attune themselves to and gain the magic thereof. How that translates into the final thing, I don't know, but I do know my whole discussion of runes and where they come from was in the first edition of the Mongoose Rune Quest. Well, cool on them. See, now nobody knows what the runes are for.
Allora, l'origine del nome è abbastanza semplice. In realtà all'epoca stavo giocando anche un gioco da tavolo che si chiamava White Bear and Red Moon, che aveva un sistema di movimento dato dalle rune. Per cui erano le rune a dirti che tipo di azione di movimento poteva fare un'unità. L'autore del gioco lo sosteneva anche con una fanzine sulla quale aveva riportato tutti i significati possibili di queste rune. Quindi le rune erano già entrate in qualche modo nella mia idea della magia e del fantasy. E quando avevo sviluppato il gioco avevo sicuramente inserito le rune nel sistema di magia, avevo pensato, beh, alla fine cosa fanno i personaggi? Sono sicuramente impegnati in una quest, in una ricerca, per diventare probabilmente dei maestri di rune, e quindi il nome RuneQuest è venuto da solo. Va anche detto che nella prima edizione pubblicata dalla Mongoose, il capitolo sulla magia delle rune non l'ho scritto io, abbiamo chiamato uno scrittore apposta per scrivere quello, perché diventava molto complicato. Io ho avuto l'idea iniziale, cioè il fatto che le rune cadono dal cielo, come oggi, come potete vedere, o nella mia idea poetica sono il sangue degli dei che arriva sulla terra, si condensa e le persone che lo trovano possono entrare in sintonia, in connessione con una o più particolari rune. Non ho la più pallida idea di come sarà il sistema di magia nella seconda versione di RuneQuest.
Done? Yes. All right. Lucca was just asking me how Mongoose got the RuneQuest rights. And it's actually kind of an interesting story. What happened is that for a while, the Avalon Hill Company, owned the rights to publish RuneQuest, and they came out with what we call the third edition of RuneQuest. The Mongoose 2 edition is really the fifth edition of RuneQuest. The Chaosium and was supposed to be producing all the material that Avalon Hill would print. And this became a very onerous task for the Chaosium to do, largely because Avalon Hill didn't really understand how to support a role-playing game. They figured as long as they came out with one item a quarter, that was probably too much because they didn't do it a couple of times. So, when they concentrated on Dr. Ruth's sex trivia game instead of the next supplement for RuneQuest, which probably made them more money, but well. So the Chaosium essentially just said, fine, RuneQuest is yours. Sold them the name and all the rights, which is about the time I stopped getting royalties. And so Avalon Hill took it over, published a couple more years worth of occasional supplements, and stopped doing it, not to mention going out of business. They got sold by their printer. Well, actually, their printer already owned them. Got sold to Avalon Hill got sold to TSR, which were publishing D&D. Strangely enough, TSR didn't particularly feel an urge to publish any RuneQuest material.
Strange.
But they sat on the name for years and years and years. And finally, after several administration changes and Wizards of the Coast bought TSR, they gave the name back. I don't think they charged him anything for it. They gave it back to Greg Stafford. Greg Stafford, meanwhile, had taken his Glorantha world and had another author put together Hero Wars as a role-playing game, which is very, very different from RuneQuest. And then that was later republished as Hero Quest. So Greg had a Glorantha game, and he had gotten sufficiently away from RuneQuest that he didn't necessarily want to publish RuneQuest again. And that's about the time that Mongoose showed up saying we'd like to publish RuneQuest, and Greg Stafford said, okay.